Thanks very much, Katya. My name is Eoin Callan, Managing Director with Bloom Impact Capital, where we recently launched the Bloom Local Food Fund, which is investing in action on nature, climate, community, and Indigenous economic reconciliation. So we're concentrated around the theme of food system transformation, deploying capital to early stage founders from seed to Series A. And so, as Katya was alluding to, I want to talk about how investors are increasingly looking to tech, to innovators like the folks in this room, to help protect nature and restore biodiversity. But I want to start by ensuring that we have a baseline understanding of the problem and addressing the question of why should we care about biodiversity. The short answer is that without biodiversity, without ecosystem health, we won't have air to breathe, water to drink, or food to eat. So biological diversity is, in simple terms, essential for life on Earth. And while this biodiversity sustains all life on our planet, it is vanishing at an alarming speed. And so 1 million species are presently on the verge of disappearing, which is the highest extinction rate in 10 million years. And that has significant implications. What's driving that loss of species? The number one driver of biodiversity loss, of nature loss, by far, is food systems. So degradation of land, overexploitation, runoff, monocropping, plus food systems contribute between 27% and 33% of greenhouse gas emissions. So the food systems value chain is responsible for about a third of emissions. So we have a negative feedback loop that is developing between food systems, nature, and climate. The flip side of that is that food systems are themselves being disrupted. And so crops are starting to fail, harvest is becoming unreliable because of that species loss, because of rising temperatures, and because of the increase in extreme weather events, like the forest fires that we've seen across Canada this summer, that we saw here in Ontario a couple of summers ago, and floods that are showing up on the doorsteps and in the fields of farmers. And so one of the ways that shows up is that over 75% of global food crops depend on animal pollination. So if we allow pollinators to disappear, our food supply chain starts to break down. The World Economic Forum estimates that 55% of global GDP depends materially in a significant way on nature. And so if you look at that from an investor perspective, particularly from the vantage point of an institutional investor that has investments across asset classes, that has big positions in all of the world's major indices, then you're looking at a situation where up to 55% of your portfolio, if you are more or less a universal investor, is at risk. And so as the picture gets clearer, as advances in data and monitoring and satellite imagery improve, investors don't like what they're seeing. They're alarmed. And so the starting point for many investors is to look at their portfolios. Institutions are asking themselves, okay, where are the exposures within our portfolio to loss of nature, and what are the interactions between our portfolio holdings and species loss? And so to understand that, they need to turn to the companies in which they invest, where they're shareholders. They have to turn to the Unilevers of the world, to Danone, Nestle, Pepsi, Cargill, General Mills, and say, okay, explain to us how your supply chains are exposed to nature and what the interactions are between what you're producing and species loss. And the short version is that these organizations have no idea. They are unable to respond to the demand from the market. They're unable to respond to the pressure that investors are putting on them for answers to these questions. And so it's a significant pain point today for these organizations. And as a lot of you in the room will appreciate, a pain point for organizations like this represents a significant opportunity. And so there's a gold rush of innovators, founders who are stepping up and helping these organizations understand. They're providing the data, they're providing the insight, helping them work through the ways that their supply chains are interacting with nature and what their exposures are. And for institutional investors, this is becoming an increasingly formalized process. So bodies like the UN Principles on Responsible Investment, which includes signatories that answer for 103 trillion in assets, are getting behind initiatives like the Task Force on Nature-Related Disclosures. You might remember a similar exercise that we went through over the last decade, led by Mark Carney, who some of you may know. And that model is being followed now in the coming years for nature. And so when investors look out, they see a few things that intrigue them. On the return side of the equation, the transition to a nature-positive economy is expected to unlock significant value and job creation. Meanwhile, on the risk side of the equation, it's estimated that you can invest about 0.27% of GDP per year over the next 10 years in order to restore degraded land across the world. So that means you're investing about 0.25% in order to mitigate risk on 55% of the global economy, 55% of your portfolio. So that's a pretty good trade. And so investors like what they see when it comes to risk mitigation. Why is it such a good trade? Well, it turns out that nature really only needs a bit of a nudge from us to start restoring itself with surprising power and speed. So we're not building from scratch, we're not building new industries, we're simply stepping back and leveraging nature in new ways that work with it rather than against it. And so in that context, it's perhaps unsurprising that coming out of the recent landmark UN Biodiversity Summit in Montreal, investors have stepped up and made a pledge to put $200 billion into nature per year by 2030. And so that's a significant amount of capital that is looking for a home. And the secret that I will let you in on is there's a shortage of investable product and opportunity. So you have capital at scale looking for somewhere to deploy in risk mitigations, but also in nature-positive solutions. And there's a few trends that investors have keyed in on. One of them is nature-based solutions. And so soil, wetlands, peat turn out to be great stores of carbon. Without them, we can't meet our emissions targets. And if we leverage them, we can get there much faster. And so one nature-based solution is regenerative agriculture. And so this is effectively reducing inputs into the soil, into the land, relying more on what's there. And the outputs from shifting to regen are better soil, better water, better carbon sequestration, a reduction in input costs, which is, as Michael will know, given his background, is a major driver of profitability for agricultural producers. And so their bottom line is improving as they make that shift. So profit increases significantly with that shift to regen. And so given that opportunity, given that landscape, what does the solution look like? From our perspective at Bloom, we think what all of us in this room need to do is start to think like a system. And so as a systems investor, what we do first is we map that system, in this case, the food system. And what we want to understand is where are the barriers? Where are the choke points? What's impeding the transition to a more regenerative system? And from there, where we move next is the leverage points. What are the investable opportunities that will unlock multiple barriers and support that transition? Now, when practicing systems investing, it's important to keep in mind that no single investor is going to do it alone. And so the approach involves effectively working with a common systems map, give or take, and inviting other investors, other stakeholders, regulators, foundations, to figure out where their key leverage points are. where can they intervene to begin to unlock barriers and drive change? At Bloom, there's a couple of key leverage points that we've zeroed in on. Upstream, regen ag, where we subscribe to the thesis that the real agents of change are those folks that are the early adopters, that are proving out the solution at the field level, that are harvesting the data, that are demonstrating return on investment, and that are turning around and sharing those insights, that data, that bottom line with peers in their industry and beginning to bring them along. And so supporting folks like that is a key part of what we're doing. And then the other key leverage point is nature tech. And so this is remote sensing, AI, MRV that is enabling this transition. So what does that look like? How does that show up in the venture ecosystem? And so a compelling example of that is Nectar Technologies. And so this is a group of kids out of Montreal that discover they have two nerdy interests in common, one of which is machine learning and the other is beekeeping. And so they get together and they say, well, surely between us, with our skills, there's something we can do to contribute to the problem, contribute to the solution to the problem of rising bee deaths. And the short version is they're right. They put sensors and trackers onto hives. They layer AI on top, and they get predictive models that anticipate threats to hive health, allowing growers to intervene and protect the hive. And it also gives them a powerful set of evidence, data that demonstrates the correlation and increasingly the causation between traditional practices and pollinator mortality, and between regenerative practices and pollinator and ecosystem health. And so their first customer was the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan. So a $250 billion plus fund that has real assets all over the world. Avocado farms in Australia, canola, blueberries in Quebec, and very long horizon models that told them the rate at which pollinator mortality was increasing was a risk to their portfolio. They faced stranded asset risk, they faced transition risk, they faced physical risk, and so became the first customer of Nectar. And with that validation, it helped get us where we are today, with more than 10% of commercial beehives in North America on Nectar's platform. Up in Nunavut, folks are using satellite imagery, AI, combined with local knowledge to predict safe caribou migration routes. And once they have those maps, they're able to share that data with shipping companies who are then able to reroute ice-breaking activity. So they're protecting those natural cycles, allowing traditional hunting practices in those territories to continue. eDNA is increasingly popular with farmers. They can take samples from rivers, from snow, from land, understand how changes in their practices are leading to the return of wildlife and the restoration of biodiversity on their properties. If we look south and across the Americas, one of the places that stands out is Colombia. So for 6 decades, Colombia was locked in an armed conflict that meant much of the territory was inaccessible for development. And so the result of that is, according to the UN Biodiversity Finance Initiative, Colombia is the most biodiverse place on the planet by square kilometer. So it represents about 14% of the world's remaining biodiversity. You got lots of great ventures on the ground, in community, working with indigenous populations to better understand and to protect that nature. So you've got folks like Arbimon that are using acoustics, supported by AI, to listen to nature. And so they're able to pick up signs like shots being fired that tell them poaching is occurring. They provide that actionable intelligence to stewards of the land who are able to intervene and prevent that poaching from occurring. You've got folks like Robisco AI out of Montreal and Terrasso that are using a combination of indigenous knowledge and AI to map forest cover. And canopy cover is one of the best predictors of underlying species diversity. And so they're identifying the hot zones that are most at risk of clearing of land, usually illegally. and allowing folks like Indigrow, which is a great company, to step in and work with community to protect those parts of the Amazon in Colombia that are most at risk. And the way that Indigrow does that is it works with local communities and finds a path forward that is regenerative and that allows them to provide for themselves. So it turns out coffee really likes shade. And so there are methods of agroforestry where you're introducing coffee into an ecosystem in a way that doesn't disrupt it and providing a really rich harvest, a really good quality coffee. Indigrow is working with Dispatch, which is a Canadian tech company. They're digital first, but have a coffee shop a few blocks from here. And I recommend stopping by. And between that partnership, you can now get home delivery of the coffee, of the goods coming out of this market anywhere in Canada. If you're a founder that's starting to work in this space or curious about the problem set and the solution, there are lots of folks you can connect with. So Google recently announced that it's going to be running a series of accelerators targeted at AI for nature. So they're working across the Americas, Canada, the US, and LATAM to find promising companies in this space and support them on their journey. The X Prize is issuing hundreds of millions of dollars in prizes for this space, for nature tech and AI that is beginning to solve for biodiversity. The last two prize winners of the X Prize that they announced included Canadian companies Rubisco and Undo. And so there's strong Canadian leadership emerging, firstly in AI and increasingly in nature tech. And so my invitation to the innovators in the room is to get connected, to get in touch. I'd love to hear about the journey that you're on and get you hooked up with some of these folks working in the space. If you're an investor, then my challenge to you is to make a pledge to invest in nature. You don't have to do it alone. So there's a number of moments coming up over the next couple of years when angels, VC, private equity, institutions, foundations will be coming together to make common pledges. So we have the next UN Biodiversity Summit. We have the Climate COP coming up in Brazil, PRI in person, the UN Oceans Conference, Change Now in Paris. So key moments when investors are going to be coming together to learn and to take the first step by making a pledge to invest in nature. Thank you.